In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful, peace and blessings be upon you. Welcome to this series on the Great Fitnah, the major internal conflict that took place after the assassination of Uthman ibn Affan. May Allah be pleased with him, and the political and military developments that followed during the caliphate of Ali ibn Abi Talib. May Allah honor him. This series examines one of the most complex and sensitive periods in early Islamic history, where political authority, tribal structures, justice, and competing calls for legitimacy all came together in a deeply fragmented landscape. This is the complete continuation covering the events surrounding the transition of power, the responses of the provinces, and the major battles that followed. After the assassination of Uthman ibn Affan, the Muslim world entered a state of extreme political instability. The question of leadership became urgent, and Ali ibn Abi Talib was pledged allegiance in Medina under very difficult circumstances. However, the political unity of the state had already been severely affected. Different regions of the caliphate held different views regarding the legitimacy and process of that pledge. The key question became, was the allegiance to Ali universally accepted across the provinces, or did the empire effectively fragment into regional powers? To understand this, we look at the major provinces of the Islamic State at that time. We begin with Medina, the political center, which itself was in a state of tension. Many senior companions and influential figures were divided in their response to the situation following Uthman's death. The environment was not one of calm consensus, but rather urgency, fear, and political pressure. From there, attention turns to the provinces. In Mecca, the situation was complex. Many of its inhabitants had strong emotional and political ties to Uthman, and the city became a gathering point for those who were opposed to the circumstances of his killing. As a result, Mecca did not represent a unified political endorsement of Ali's leadership at that stage. In Basra, divisions were also significant. The province contained multiple groups, those who supported Ali, those who demanded justice for Uthman, and those who chose neutrality. Political and military movements began forming there, and different leaders emerged with different agendas. Some forces moved toward Mecca to organize militarily, while others remained in Basra awaiting further developments. This internal fragmentation eventually contributed to the events that led to the Battle of the Camel. In Kufa, the situation was equally complicated. Ali sought support from the city, as it was a major military center. However, responses varied. Some groups expressed support for Ali, while others adopted a position of neutrality. A key figure in Kufa, Abu Musa al-Ash'ari, encouraged restraint and warned against involvement in internal conflict among Muslims, which affected the speed and scale of mobilization. Despite repeated attempts to rally support, the response from Kufa was initially limited, and only later did larger numbers begin to move. In Syria, Muawiyah ibn Abi Sufyan maintained control over a strong and organized administrative and military structure. His position was centered on demanding accountability for the killing of Uthman, before recognizing any new political order. As a result, Syria remained politically separate from the authority in Medina at that time, creating a major division within the caliphate. In Egypt, the situation also reflected internal division. Different groups aligned with different political positions, and there were competing centers of influence among local leaders and military commanders. Some factions supported Ali, others opposed him, and others remained undecided, waiting to see how the broader political situation would unfold. Across all provinces, three broad political blocs gradually emerged. One group demanded justice for the killing of Uthman and prioritized accountability. A second group supported the legitimacy of Ali's leadership as Caliph. A third group chose neutrality, refusing to participate directly in military confrontation. These divisions were not purely ideological. They were also influenced by tribal affiliations, regional interests, and differing interpretations of legitimacy and governance. As tensions escalated, attempts were made by Ali ibn Abi Talib to stabilize the situation. Envoys were sent to various regions to request support and unity under the central authority. However, these efforts were met with mixed results. In some areas, support was limited or delayed. In others, political resistance or neutrality slowed down mobilization. This meant that instead of a unified state response, military forces began forming in separate regions. One of the most significant developments was the movement of forces from Mecca and Basra toward confrontation, which ultimately led to the Battle of the Camel. This battle did not arise from a single cause, but rather from overlapping tensions. Demands for justice, questions of legitimacy, and the collapse of centralized consensus. It marked the first major armed confrontation between major Muslim groups after the assassination of Uthman. At the same time, efforts continued to gather support from Kufa. Multiple envoys were sent to encourage participation. Eventually, a portion of Kufa's forces did mobilize and move toward the theater of events, although not all groups participated. This partial mobilization meant that forces aligned with Ali were strengthened, but still reflected internal diversity rather than complete unity. As events unfolded, the Battle of the Camel became a turning point. It demonstrated that the conflict was no longer theoretical or political, but had become a direct military confrontation between major factions of the early Muslim community. Following this, attention shifted toward the broader confrontation with Syria, which would later develop into the Battle of Siffin. In parallel, Egypt also experienced continued instability. Competing authorities and shifting allegiances meant that control over the region was not fully stable, and military actions occurred between rival groups. Some governors attempted to maintain order through negotiation and limited agreements, while others pushed for stronger military enforcement of political decisions. Over time, the situation became even more structured into three major camps: supporters of Uthman's cause, demanding justice, supporters of Ali's caliphate, and those who remained neutral or cautious. Eventually, many of the neutral groups would be drawn into later conflicts, including Siffin, where positions hardened further. The Battle of Siffin represented a major escalation in the conflict between the central authority of Ali and the forces of Syria under Muawiyah. Unlike earlier events, this confrontation involved large, organized armies and extended negotiations alongside fighting. Despite attempts at arbitration and mediation, the conflict did not resolve the underlying political disagreements. Following Siffin, another major conflict emerged in the form of the Battle of Nahrawan, involving a separate group that had broken away from both major camps. This further illustrates how fragmented the political landscape had become. By this stage, the early unity of the caliphate had been replaced by multiple competing centers of authority, each with its own interpretation of legitimacy and justice. The state was no longer a single unified political entity in practice, but rather a collection of regions aligned under different leaders and ideologies. Looking at the broader picture, the Great Fitnah was not simply a military conflict. It was a period of deep political transformation where questions of governance, legitimacy, justice, and authority were being tested in real time under extreme pressure. The consequences of this period would shape Islamic political history for generations. In conclusion, what we observe is a fragmented political landscape shaped by competing loyalties and rapidly changing alliances. The provinces acted independently, the military blocs formed around different claims, and attempts at unity struggled under the weight of crisis. This marks the end of this combined episode. In the next part of the series, we will continue exploring the deeper causes behind these divisions and how they developed into the later historical outcomes.